Hey, everybody. Episode 3 of Built for a Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Vanderwall. Today is an exciting day. I'm excited to introduce to you Pastor Bryan Sederwall, Pastor B, as he is known around town. Amazing story of purpose and calling on his life. And I'm so excited to share with you what's happening in Denver, specifically what he's doing, but the reach really is far greater than that. The kingdom purpose, the testimony, the story of how this came to be. I know Pastor B from our church, being a part of his ministry, but also being at Denver Dream Center. I've seen firsthand what they're doing. I've met some of the people there, and his story is gonna bless you today. It's really good. So without further ado, Pastor Bryan Sederwall, thanks for coming down to the studio today and doing this podcast.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Always excited to connect, and of course, anytime we can share what God's doing in the city of Denver, love the opportunity.
Absolutely. I think, we've had, for those of you that are in Denver, you understand that from a leadership standpoint, it's been, I mean, can I say a less kingdom standpoint, mindset to say the least, right? I mean, it just seems like it's been continually moving further and further and further left in a lot of ways, and in almost every way. But there's so much that God's doing in the midst of that, right? There's so much happening. And if you're outside of Denver, I think from the outside looking in, people recognize Colorado is a beautiful place to be. Everybody loves Colorado, no doubt. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. But we have this really unique city where we've got a really robust urban setting in Denver and we're in surrounding areas, and then we have a lot of cow country kind of out in the plains, right? So we've got a lot of suburbanites, I'll call them. I'm one of them. I'm not going to say that I won't, or that I'm not, but we get kind of isolated in our bubbles of what we're doing. And one thing that really just was so powerful to me was when we started connecting and you started sharing, listen, this is 25 miles down the street from you. Right. And this is what God's doing. Has really been really incredible, and I'm so proud of what you've done. I'm so thankful that we're connected and that I can see God's hand moving in Denver in the depths of it, right? So I'm excited to unpack that. Stepping back a little bit, can you just introduce yourself, maybe your family, kind of where you're at and who you are?
Yeah, I mean, because the journey is incredibly interesting, especially when people hear what I do now, but recognize where I came from. So I grew up in Illinois. Okay. And immediately people think Chicago. I am a Bears fan, but I grew up Southern Illinois. So it was farmers, coal miners, and my hometown was 5,000 people. So it wasn't a lot of gangs, wasn't a lot of crazy. Gave my life to Jesus when I was 4, but really felt called. I tell people when I was 12. I don't remember who the speaker was at a camp, but I was there. But I remember walking out of that camp feeling like, man, I just want to tell people about Jesus the rest of my life. Wow. So I don't have this crazy testimony of running from God and him chasing me down. And I didn't, I've never been an addict. I've never been in prison. God took me through this amazing calling to be a youth pastor in Florida for a couple of years, and then moved to California and got married there to my beautiful wife, Joy. And so we were youth pastors, but I've always loved sports. And sports is that cross-cultural that, the honest reality is if you've got a jump shot, and being a 6'2" white guy, that was my claim to fame. So I could honestly play anywhere because I could shoot the basketball. Yeah. And so there were courts that I would live at in California. And really I tell people, like, a big cultural shift for me came in California, just living in the barbershops and on the basketball court and connecting with people that didn't look like me, that were coming from gangs in the inner city. And just I loved that opportunity. And so being a youth pastor, my heart really moved toward community and trying to figure out how do I connect with all these young men that are actively in gangs and in trouble, and give them a place that they could come to church or find hope in Christ. And so in California, started a nonprofit, built a basketball court, started running midnight basketball leagues. And it was wild. So I'd be the only white guy in the gym. My wife always jokes around, like, easy to find me when you needed me. But we would sometimes have upwards of 200 guys come, like checking their guns at the door to come in to play basketball. And what I saw was God just moved through relationships and opportunities. And so wild story of, again, small town in Illinois, sports, opportunities with just a passion for people. So we got married in California, just celebrated 21 years of marriage. 3 amazing boys that are now 19, 17, and 14. So we have a college kid, a high school kid, and a middle school kid. And my house is full testosterone. My poor wife, like, she's always asking, like, man, is this just how boys are? Because my boys are competitive, strong leaders, never back down. So it's either a competition or a fight or something fun in our house.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I can imagine.
It's wild.
Yeah, that's. I have a boy and a girl, and it kind of evens itself out a little bit because I get kind of both extremes. But just for some context, just so I know, like when you're talking about starting a nonprofit, A, what part of California, and B, how old were you when you started the nonprofit and started, this kind of assimilation of people?
So, I graduated. My first job, I was 22 in Florida. Was there for about 2.5 years. So I got to California, just north of LA. So we're in LA County, a huge commuter area, about 500,000 people. But really an overflow of gangs, highest meth labs per capita, gang activity per capita. And so just seeing an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I think I was probably 27 when I started the first nonprofit.
So young. Yeah.
Had no clue what I was doing.
Yep.
I just knew there was an opportunity. And honestly, what I saw, Jeff, too, was from like just kingdom principles, being, trained to be a youth pastor in Bible college. My lens was so focused on church and Sunday morning. And we were really good, right, at taking offerings on Sundays. Mm-hmm. But I realized is there's a small percentage of finances on a Sunday morning compared to how much is in a community. And so one of my first opportunities was working with a friend who was in Washington, D.C., and he had reached out because of the area we were in. And so when we started this nonprofit, he got us some seed funding, and it was $50,000. So at 27, I'd been a youth pastor long enough to know, like, man, I'm doing car washes and bake sales.
Yeah, it's a lot of dough.
And if we made $500, we're excited. But if you pencil that out, you're making like 4 cents an hour. People working like bad economics, but everybody does it. So when there was this seed grant to, part of it was to start an after-school program, and $25,000 was for computers. I'm like, man, it's way easier to look for financial resources instead of just tapping into the same Sunday morning pockets and people, and give an opportunity to do more in the community. So again, it was, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I went to Bible college. I didn't know how to start a nonprofit, how to run a nonprofit. But what I learned in those formative years created a large space of recognizing how to connect better in the community.
Yeah, there's an economic component of it where I think, a lot of pastors go into it thinking I'm a pastor, and they really need to realize, or even a youth, but you need to be able to run a business. And that's the thing, right?
It's huge.
No doubt. So,
huge.
But what's interesting, and I want to kind of scratch on is, when you say like, listen, man, like I was easy to find because there was 200 guys there and I was the only white guy shooting jump shots or whatever. I mean, that's real. Yeah. But there's got to be some sort of anointing on that to where you felt like, I feel comfortable here. I feel, and they felt comfortable.
It's funny you say that, because I tell people, and I'm sure we'll get into more stories, and as I unpack stories, I've been in more crack houses, I've been in more shootings, I've been in more basketball courts, in places that, now that I'm even older, I look back and I can't believe I was there. But for God's anointing, a lot of people praying, and I never took it for granted. So I was never like thinking I was untouchable or I'm this special person. But I was never afraid. And there were moments like one of my closest nearest, he's family to us. One of the greatest stories from the California days, when we were running the basketball stuff, I'd always pray that God would let me connect to what we call like the shot callers or the leaders. So we'd have a couple hundred guys coming around, but there's always a few individuals that would stand out. Like they were the guys that just, they made the calls for either their gang or their turf or their neighborhood. And one of these young men, he was 17 when he first started coming. His name was Trey. 6'2", 6'3", just he built like a man, tatted up, all Compton, and started connecting with him. And 3 years into the journey, he'd given his life to Jesus. And it took a while just to like walk through, typical stories. Dad was in Compton somewhere, but didn't have a relationship. Had only seen him a couple of times, and just a lot of hardship. And when he was 20, so 3 years into our journey, it was my day off, so I hadn't looked at my phone. And in the evening, I went to my phone and saw that I'd missed like 100 calls from Trey. So I call him back, and I can still hear his words. He's like, B, they shot my mom. They shot my mom. She's dead. And so I'm like, Trey, I'm coming over. So I go over to his apartment complex, and literally, Jeff, it's like a scene from a movie. So there's people crying, there's people, like moving, and a lot of the guys are strapping up, and they're going to head down and handle business and retaliate. And I don't know if it was just me being impulsive. I don't know if it was the Holy Spirit, maybe a little bit of both. But as they're getting in, I'm like, Trey, I'm coming with you. And I jump in the car. And now we're driving to Compton in the middle of the night. They're strapped up, and I'm thinking, like, what am I doing? Right? Like this, right? So like all I can do is pray at this point, and we're driving, and grace to God, we get close, and they actually pull into a gas station, like, B, you got to get out. So thankfully they recognize, that one of us didn't fit in that moment. But now Trey, fast forward, he just turned 37. So 20 years later, but he'll tell that story that first off, he knew that's when I really cared and I was real. I'm like, well, thank God for that, but also thank God you let me out of the car. Yeah. Nothing ended up happening that night, praise God, in the moment. But in that serious situation, like, he stayed connected. And then what we've seen over the years, in his late 20s, he finally went to college, went to Grand Canyon University, and overcoming, he'd been in horrible foster care and just, inner city growing up, and had always doubted himself, but incredibly smart. So graduated magna cum laude from Grand Canyon, got to be there for his graduation. Then he got enrolled to USC, which is like every South Central kid's dream. Yeah. Got his master's degree. And then 2 years ago, he graduated with his doctorate. So now he's Dr. Trey. Wow, that's awesome. Still lives in LA, is a part of a couple of clinics out there, but actually is part-time staff here in Denver. So he flies out to Denver once every couple months. He does a lot of online counseling and therapy because of his own background and story. So those wild moments of, to your question, man, if there wasn't a special anointing or just God's favor, been in places that I should never have been. The relationship that God's allowed me to connect with people that have such crazy different backgrounds, but through that, He's done amazing stories. Wow,
yeah, I mean that's amazing. My interaction with, kind of that drug community was when I was young. I was a late teenager. Haven't really shared much of this publicly, but here we go. Hey. Might as well now. Let's go. But I was involved in that out of pure stupidity, and completely ignoring the fact that I was born again when I was 20, but I've been in church my whole life. And so when I was in college, I decided it would be a good idea to start getting involved. Started just with like marijuana and stuff, but then got further down the road because I was just an idiot, and I just felt like this is what you do. So I was in that, not out of being born into something like that and having to live through it, but I willingly walked into that. And the evil that I saw in a couple of places, a couple of shootings and things like that, was completely voluntary. I mean, literally, it was just absolute stupidity that it got me there. But I realized, and I'm talking 1/100th of what 1/1000th of what you've seen, but it was enough to be like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. So I'm not like, hey, I'm compassionate, I need to get in there and get my hands dirty. I'm like, right? So I see it, and I see it from the outside looking in, that there's something really special about how God wired you and how he made you to say, no, something's broken. I'm going to get in here, right? I want to see things restored. I want to see something broken, fixed. And I think that's a special calling. I think that's a special anointing. It's different than being an evangelist. It's different than just being a pastor. It's different than just being, someone that's intentional. But listen, not all of us. I mean, I think I've realized that, part of the blessing that God's given me is that through resources, I can help, right? Absolutely. It doesn't mean I have to be you don't want to see my jump shot, dude. Right. Yeah. But I can still be a part of it, right? And so I think we'll be able to unpack some of that too. And I'm sure you've had people that have come alongside of you that have just been, that your friend from Washington, D.C. with Seed Money, people that have come across. I mean, I even know that you're involved with, here in Denver, a lot of sports teams and things like that. And what God's done there has been amazing. Right. But so we're in our late 20s. We're starting a nonprofit. How did you come from California to Colorado? And then how did some of that 10, 15 years kind of really turn into, I mean, I'm probably overskipping a lot here, but how did that kind of transition to the beginning of the Denver Dream Center? Yeah,
interestingly enough, I loved what we're doing in California. And for me, it was sort of living out the crazy dream. I could never have scripted that from where and how I grew up. Again, mom and dad, both present, public school teachers, good family, raised me in church. And I don't know where, that calling kicked in, but I've always been drawn toward the broken, the hurting, the hardest stories out there. Maybe part of the sports side of me is I love the biggest challenges that can be created. And so when we were in California, we started having a family. So we had our first son, Noah. And then in 2005, we'd come to Denver for a conference. And my wife's sister lives in Denver. Her brother was just moving to Colorado Springs from San Diego to pastor church in the Springs. And I'm a big journaler. So we had been talking about potential next steps and where we were going to stay in California. 2005, the economy was going crazy. Housing market was out of control. So we were in this little bitty house, and we were expecting number two. Mm-hmm. So like, man, we got to make a decision. Either we're going to invest and get a bigger house and get planted here, or God, what do you have? And I remember my wife and I talking in 2005, sitting downtown and just loving Denver. And having that conversation, man, if God would let us pick where we could go, Denver would be a great place. Because again, you mentioned earlier, it's like, I love the urban, I love the city, I love people, I love busy, I love crazy. My wife loves country. She likes slower paced and being away from the crazy. And so Denver just had sort of both appeals. And long story short, as we were praying about it, we had an opportunity, a couple of, in ministry scope, big opportunities at big churches. One church flew me in, and the church was really big. And so we're thinking like, maybe this is, it's like business and ministry. People go from like, your starter church to your next position. And it seemed really good on paper. But being there, we're like, man, this just isn't the right fit. And had another opportunity, just nothing felt like it was peaceful. And I'd been journaling about a Denver Dream Center. I'm like, if we could ever go to Denver, this is what I'd want to do. And then had a random opportunity. My cousin actually started Red Rocks Church. And so in 2006, we started talking about doing a church plant in downtown Denver. And then it evolved into like, why don't we just do a second campus and expand Red Rocks Church? Well, if people know Red Rocks Church now, they can touch any empty building and fill it. Yeah. But in 2006, there was like 100 people. They had just started going. And so we were all like 32 years old. All of us thinking we were smarter than we were. We had no plan, no good concept. And so the reality was my wife and I decided that we're going to come to Denver and we're going to chase this calling. Didn't really have a job, didn't have a place to live. We had a 2-year-old. So I tell people, here's how to not start a business or plant a church. We told our pastor in July, we had a baby in August, sold our house in September, and then packed up and left in October. So we're literally driving to California with a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, no place to live, and no firm job. And just like, all right, God, we know you've got something for us. And we lived in our in-laws' basement for the first 3 months with a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old and just trying to figure things out. I knew like maybe 2 people in the state of Colorado. And so we got here, and it was almost like when God called Abram. It was like, get here. When you get to the land that I'm taking you to, I'll show you what's going to take place. And so we just took a leap of faith in 2006, landed here in Denver.
So I'm sitting here, and I'm just totally getting blessed by what you're talking about, and here's why. The other people that come in here are talking about the same thing. I didn't have peace here. I didn't have peace here, but I did have peace here, even though none of that stuff makes any sense, right? But my peace was there. I knew God was calling me, and we moved in faith. Yeah. God is after your faith, right? He wants to see you move. You mentioned Abram, that kind of Abraham moment where you're like, I don't know where there is, but I'm going, right? That's, man, for our listeners, it's this common thread that you hear: peace and faith. Faith to do something, and the peace of God that rests on it, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So 2 people, you're living with your in-laws. This isn't it's like, oof, but you're thankful you got a roof, whatever. But so you go from 2 people, and a lot of people don't really know you or what you're really doing in Denver. So to go from 2 to where you are right now is insane. No joke, man. That is supernatural, incredible. Yeah. And it's a testimony to God's faithfulness and His goodness and His call and purpose on your life. So where do we go from 2 people and hey, we're rolling. Probably sold your 800 square foot house for $4.6 million in California.
Well, I wish, not quite that much, but no, it was. We had a little bit of equity. I mean, that was the God moment. We bought bought a house in California before we thought we were ready. And right before the economy shifted, we just got lucky. We sold our house, had enough that we could live off of that for the first year. And so really it was, I mean, the book of Nehemiah is like my favorite book to read, study, and to live out. So when I tell the story of like what became now the Denver Dream Center, I wish we had that miracle moment, right? When I'm with some pastors or churches, and I hear them say like, I was preaching about needing a building and someone handed me a $2 million check. Yeah, that moment's never happened. So if anybody's watching and wants to make it happen,
million is
I will receive
M-I-L-L-I-O.
that, right? Any 7 figures, 6 figures. But that's just not been our journey.
Yeah.
Our journey really was Nehemiah. What I love about the story of Nehemiah is he's in a position, cupbearer to the king, and he's got the ability, being in the presence of the king, but he can't really speak out because if he does in the wrong way or time or manner, he's out and there's a new cupbearer. So he had to show up and serve relentlessly for months to do his job. And then finally the king says, hey, something's wrong, right? I know you're not sick, so it can only be a matter of the heart. And Nehemiah had heard about the plight still happened in Jerusalem. The walls were still torn down. And that wasn't something new, right? Jerusalem had been destroyed 150 years prior to that. But something had triggered in Nehemiah differently where there was this like passion. So the Bible says he prayed, he mourned, and he fasted. And then when the king said, what's up? Like something's going on. I love it because the Bible says Nehemiah prayed, then answered the king, right? We all have the Nehemiah prayer moments, like when a cop pulls you over and you got like 18 seconds to pray, like, God, don't let me get a ticket. That's the Nehemiah prayer moment. So he'd already been praying. But when the king asked him, like, what's going on? He lays it out. And then the king says, well, what do you need? And in that moment, Nehemiah makes the crazy request of, I need, a year's vacation. I need you to pay for everything and send the resources and that monumental task. And so looking back, I didn't know it that clearly when I started at age 32, now 17 years later. But I had this crazy passion for the city. And so really what I started with was I would ride the city bus and just find my way around the city. Honest to God, I would ask people like, hey, where's the hood? Like, where's the craziest spots in our city? And they'd tell me, 38th and down, or go to 5 Points, or this area in Park Hill. And so I would just show up and I'm like walking the neighborhood trying to find out like, where's the needs and what's going on.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. And my wife's the like trooper at home because we've got these little babies. And so I'm out sometimes, middle of the night and just trying to find people, like no ministry, no like budget, no nothing, but just trying to find and help people. And then I'm, as I'm finding people, I'm trying to, well, where do I take you? Like, where's the resource or the faith community? And so it really, super long story, but it took me about 10 years to really lay that, or 7 years. It took 7 years to lay that foundation of just meeting somebody, then getting to meet somebody else and figure out what that looks like.
But why? Like, why are you walking around down? Is this just like a fire shut up in your bones that you're just like, I have to, like, I want to go to the most broken place, find the most broken people, and that's where I'm starting, or that's where I'm.
It is. It's the craziness of my calling. I love, it's why I can't be a Sunday morning pastor. Like, once you love Jesus, I'm like, hey, good for you. Hang out with these other people. I got to go find somebody else that does it. Man. And so my calling is that, and it's just it is a sort of an insatiable desire to find the most broken, the hardest places, and that just began the journey to where we started connecting with people and serving and doing what we could. So actually, we started initially what we called Denver Church. So we were doing like a Sunday morning church. We started on the 16th Street Mall in the movie theater there. Getting people in, but what I realized, like, it's just not a normal church plant because we were a couple blocks away from New Genesis. So like our second Sunday morning, there's like this line of homeless people coming up for donuts. And they would come in the movie theater, and there's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 theater, movie screens in there, and we would just lose people. We didn't have enough volunteers or security. So like part of the deal, we'd have to like wrap up and then go canvas on the theaters, like make sure we're pulling the homeless people out. And so we did that for a few years, but that just opened up relationships. Yep. So I met a guy that had just got out of prison, got back in trouble, landed in community corrections, and was in a facility called Dahlia Facility downtown. Yep. And so again, not know many people. I would just show up and I'd give him my ID. They let me come in and I would just spend time with him. The God moment was after doing that for a few weeks, his case manager became the director of that facility. So 120 guys in that facility. And she asked when I was coming down if other guys could just come and talk. So unintentionally, this men's group started out of that facility. And of course, guys like to eat. So I would show up with Domino's $5 pizzas, and they thought it was the greatest thing ever. And it went from like 2 guys to 4 guys to 20 guys to 40 guys. And then I'm recognizing like they made bad choices, right? But they're still normal. They want to get a job. They want to be a dad. They want to get back out. They want to regain their life. And being in community corrections, they can go out to get jobs. And so they're halfway into the community while they're still incarcerated in the community correctional facility. And so started trying to work in that space, which then poured into, like, most of them have kids. So they were trying to figure out, how do we serve kids and support them? And then the single mom situation, and just, one thing being building on another.
And so man, there's so much here. So I want to circle back to, because I'm still just completely blown away about the middle of the night walking, but I want to circle back to like, a lot of people that I run into are like, I'm going to give them pizza and we're going to do the thing, kind of we're going to set up something and then we're going to start sneaking Jesus in there. Or are you just like, because as many people have been born again,
right,
you got to be just bringing the word straight up. Like, here, man, listen, dude, this is who I am. This is why I'm here.
Yeah.
And so maybe tell me about that a little bit, because I think a lot of times, in my opinion, again, I just see this from the outside looking in, we're so concerned about winning people just to show up, and we just kind of sprinkle in some flowery Jesus.
Right.
But really, these people are in a crisis situation. And so how hard do you come in just straight up like?
Yeah, well, my number one core value is relationships. Mm-hmm. And so if you can build and establish a relationship, it creates trust. And on trust, you then have the opportunity to be straight up and honest. And I tell people all the time, like, even what we do now as the Denver Dream Center, as big as we've gotten, as much as we do, we have programs like crazy, but we are not program centered. I can't compete with programs that have budgets and staff and curriculum. But what we know is our strength is transformation. And so if we can find someone that's dealing with an addiction or incarceration, or they're medicating the past, or they've been abused, or whatever it is, they can find hope in Christ. And so when I started connecting in the facility, they really didn't care. What I found was, when I started going in 17 years ago, it didn't take long to build the right relationships to where I could walk in and didn't need to give my ID anymore. They'd be like, "Oh, Pastor B, what's up?" And I would come into the facility. The different case managers or directors would just let me come, because one is I try to be a blessing. I always say, be a blessing, never a burden. Mm-hmm. So if I ever came in and got in their way or wanted to do my thing where it put stress on their staff or their systems, then they don't want me around. But if I could find ways to increase, like, the moral support of the guys that are in the facility, it's simple things. I would try to find out, like, from the staff or the directors, like, what their favorite coffee was. So if I'm going to show up, I'd show up with a coffee, and just super small ways that they actually, when I would show up, then they liked that I was there. Yeah. But when I would start connecting with the guys, first off, I don't know who started it, but Pastor B is what they started calling me 17 years ago. And so that immediately sort of created that image and persona of, like, oh, Pastor B's here. And sometimes I was like, what are you pastor of? And that would, create the immediate opportunity to share the gospel. But man, I've got in 17 years of being in those facilities, there's tens of thousands now of relationships and phone numbers, and getting to that point of, like, transformation comes through an identity with Jesus. And some of the most amazing, like, salvation moments, prayer moments, and Bible studies either happened in the building, or one of the facilities. It's since closed down a couple years ago, but they had an outdoor space, and they put a basketball hoop up. So again, it's like, there's my spot. And so my wife, again, being gracious, I would spend a lot of evenings, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, just down there where guys could come out and we're just shooting hoops. And then I'd pull a guy off to the side. And I had a guy come and just ask me, he's like, you can tell how nervous he was. And his whole question was, can God forgive someone that's committed murder? Mm. And getting to that point of how amazing God's grace is. And yes, he can. And in the parking lot, praying with someone to receive Christ. Like, just story after story of men and women coming to Christ.
Yeah, it's awesome. So good. I love it. When you were walking downtown at 2 a.m, did you ever just get straight rolled? Or was it something that, like, were you ever in positions where you're like, I can't even imagine. Again, forgive me, because I'm a suburbanite trying to put myself in your shoes. But were you ever in positions where you're like, this is, in your natural man is like, this is craziness, or were you all the time? Okay.
All the time. I tell my wife, she'll laugh because I always think how fun it would have been if I would have had a GoPro on my head, because there's so many instances and moments and stories from being in places with either, politicians and people that I shouldn't be in the room with, or those crazy stories that it's really hard to explain. I mean, powerful story. One of my nearest and dearest friends now I met about 15 years ago. He's got a powerful story, but I would go into one of the facilities when we were still doing our Sunday morning Denver church days. We didn't have a setup team or tear down, and so I would go to the facilities and I would sign guys out, and they would be our setup team. And I would just tell them, like, dude, if you just come to church, I don't care if you sit in the service, I just need your help, and I'll get you out on a Sunday morning. And so
it's a good deal.
One day I was in one of the facilities, and again, I always pray for God to connect me to the leaders and shot callers if I can find them. And this 6'6", really large man had just gotten to the facility. He'd been there not even a week, I think. And so I walk up and just, I'm just that bold, like, hey, what's your name? And he's sort of looking at me like, who are you? I'm like, hey, they call me Pastor B. You want to get out of here on Sunday? I can get you to church with me. He's looking at me like, dude, I just got here. What are you talking about? But in those early days, God's favor was so crazy that I could sign guys out, work it quick. And so I told him, like, I don't care, if you come in, your girlfriend can meet you there, whatever. I need to get you there. And so he came the first Sunday, helped and set up. And I probably 4-5 Sundays in a row. And then like the 5th Sunday, he was sitting outside, and man, the Holy Spirit just rocked him. And so here he is, 6'6", 330 pounds. At 17, he had gotten to an altercation, was a gang member. He's been shot 2 or 3 times and stabbed up until 17. At 17, a drug altercation went bad. He ended up taking a life. And so at 17, he got a life sentence in prison. Served from 17 to 31, got out, got back in trouble. So I met him when he was 33. Okay. So here he is sitting outside, and he tells his girls, like, I got to go inside. And so I'm up preaching. I see him walk in. He's got a box of Kleenex, and he's just bawling. There's snot everywhere. And just, God rocked him, gave his life to Jesus. And now he's, family. He is incredible, owns his own business. But there was a point that he was in a facility still, and his daughter, who's actually now an intern at the Dream Center, so that full circle, she's 17 now, but she was 4 years old, and Big Mark had called me and said, be like, they're doing drugs in the house, you got to get down and get my baby girl out of there. And so this is one of those like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning moments, and I go down to California Street in 5 Points, and there's no electricity in the house, and like from my way through, there's people, I don't know what's going on for sure, but able to find his daughter, get her out, and we take her back to our house so that my wife can take care of her for a couple days and get her to the right spot. But just, there's so many stories where I look back, even it's Christmas season. I was thinking about this the other day. I used to drive and make sure I always had extra toys in my car. And I used to have this old 4Runner. So I was driving around in Park Hill delivering some toys, and I pulled into a gas station, and a guy was trying to hustle a debit card or a food card, and I'm like, I'm not going to give you money for that, but do you need some food, or what do you need? And so we started a conversation, and he's telling me about his kids and some stuff. I'm like, well, if you're close, I've actually got toys wrapped. Like, part of I want to vet his story. He's like, dude, it's right over here. So now I look back, and the crazy part is, like, I just drove and followed him over to this shady apartment complex, right? And he's like, yeah, it's the second story up here. Like, right? It's a setup.
Walking up there.
Dude, it's a setup to like, pastor in Denver murdered. And
totally.
But walk up, and sure enough, his girl's in there.
Wow.
And 3 young kids and a mother-in-law, and they've got nothing. It's just empty. And so I bring him back down, and we bring up all these toys and just have a minute to where, like, and I let him bring them in. So it's not from me,
that's right,
but let him be a dad and have that moment. And there's so many stories of like being in places that I should never be. And thankful that I got a mom and dad and people that pray like crazy. They're GoPro moments.
So you're in it so much on a daily basis. Do you still have points where you have to sit down with the Lord and really calibrate, like, God, am I in the right place? Am I doing the right things? Am I hearing you? Like, do you still have those moments, or are you so?
Yeah. Well, it's part of it is, I love sharing the early stories, and from starting a business.
Yeah.
Right. You part of your prayer life is God bless this. We need some money, we need some staff, we need a building, right?
Right.
And so, I just reverse engineered. Again, is starting a ministry or a business or a nonprofit. 3 things I always say is, one, build a team, pick a location, and raise your budget. And when you get to a certain place, especially in ministry and church planting, it's launch, and then your hope and prayers that you get enough people coming that eventually out of what you do on a Sunday has the ability to create influence outside of that.
Yep.
I was on staff at big churches, and so love church. But what I saw in my own personal journey was so much effort and intentionality on the weekend that we were missing Monday through Saturday. And when I started going out into the community and meeting with our police chief and with Parks and Rec and Housing Authority, and what I saw was needs everywhere, but I didn't see the church as part of that resource or solution. And that can't be what Jesus intended. Where on a Monday when I was on staff, we'd wake up and talk about how many people, how was the coffee, enough volunteers, kids, workers, all that's important. But now spending time with the city, they wake up on a Monday and they're tracking housing crisis and fentanyl and youth shootings and homelessness and all of these major issues. Never once does our city wake up and say, how many were in church yesterday? And so we've created this almost safe separation from where we want to grow spiritually to what our needs and concerns are. And so now we've got to a place where we're starting to take on contracts for the city. Our team has grown from what was me running around forever to now we have over 30 people on staff. And so now the struggle is that prayer's God, am I leading well? Am I managing this? And our finances, one point, if someone gave us $100, I'd be yes, we're good.
Yeah.
And now, we're a multi-million-dollar budget to sustain what we do. So the pressure is just different.
Yeah. It's interesting. I give this analogy sometimes. I've heard it, and it really rang true with me. And so I've used it. Is for a lot of years, I was able to, I'm on a ship, or a boat, and I can still see the dock, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm look, I might be a ways out, but if I had to, I could still row back to that boat, right? Or to that dock, right? If I had to, I could grab my team, my family,
right,
and we could swim back, and I could go back to doing this and that if I had to, right? And it was a couple years ago where I'm if I'm really going where God's calling me, I can't get back to that dock, and I'm all in.
Right.
And so there is that moment, and then you're talking about stewardship, right? Because now you're God, if God doesn't provide, which He promised He would, so I'm not worried about that. But it doesn't mean the natural doesn't show up, and I'm looking at real budgets and real people and real adversity and real things, right? So. And I think it's very true that that the reason we have a Built for a Purpose podcast, because I believe the enemy's after your purpose. Absolutely going after your purpose, because he's look, I can't keep him from being born again now.
Right.
I can't snatch him out of the Father's hand, but I can totally poo-poo on their purpose and get them just to a place to where they're not a threat anymore.
Right.
And so what you're talking about is God's opening doors. He's given you a platform. And now you're in a stewardship mode, not in a survival mode.
Right.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah. I mean, we prayed forever. I tell people when I first started really getting deep, the early years, it was the Nehemiah moment. So when Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, he doesn't just attack the walls immediately. The Bible says he gets there and he goes out at night. And it's funny because I was doing this before I really started reading Nehemiah in depthly. And man, that's my story.
Yeah.
But what Nehemiah did was he went out to evaluate, where's the weakest spots and what's going on in the city. And he didn't just attack the project where, now, especially with social media and the context where we live in, something can happen. Immediately there's a response. And sometimes we respond before we even know clearly the details or the background. And then we'll have to apologize later because we read what we thought was a true report and then it wasn't. And we run all over the place. And so I love that Nehemiah took time to go and evaluate what's going on and where are the needs of the city. And then I look at the story of Nehemiah. I mean, dude had been a cupbearer. What talent did this guy have? Right. Taste the drink and taste the food.
Hopefully don't die, get poisoned.
That and stand still in the presence of the king. And now he's taking on this project of, he's got to put on his military hat because there's people coming against him. construction hat because he's never like built something, but now he's taken on the rebuilding of walls. This leadership role of now he's leading an entire workforce, like just crazy.
Yeah, and what's funny about Nehemiah too is that when you read through Nehemiah, he took authority.
Yeah.
Right. He saw something, God is calling him to it, and then he took authority over it because he got a lot of pushback
Absolutely.
from a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I love everybody's kind of got that kindred spirit in the Bible, like really resonates with them. And Nehemiah is clearly yours, and I think that's amazing. So I've had an interaction with the Dream Center. So just to lay a little groundwork, a couple years ago, when COVID hit, ClearShift, our organization, we did that Farmers to Friends deal, right? So basically, I think it was Trump that put this in place, right? Essentially, it was like instead of just having all the CARES Act, instead of having all this produce going bad, we're going to buy it from the farmers, and we're going to give it to people in need. So we brought down a pickup truck once or twice a week, and we would pick up these boxes of food from the Dream Center. And you and I did not know each other yet, but. So I didn't realize we had already connected some way, but all I knew is there's these people downtown giving out boxes of food. And so even in South Denver, we were advertising this, right? Not like come in and buy a car. We knew the people coming to pick up boxes were just in need. And so the people that found our place, it was an incredible opportunity to minister to these people. We're praying with them. We're talking about what God's doing. Like, hey, they're riding the struggle bus because they have no hope. Things are weird. People are, freaking out. And that was incredible. And that was fruit from your ministry that opened your hand and did some amazing things. So I'd love to pivot to kind of the people that don't know what the Dream Center is. I'm sure they'll look it up, but how did you go from, I got this network of people, I got this network of not just like leadership people and people that I know, but I got a bunch of people that I got numbers and phone numbers and relationships built. And then you're like, I want to build the Dream Center, right? So can you talk to me about how that came to pass?
Yeah. So, the early years, it was the get to know the city. And we always say this, cause and concern are two words that are critical for us. So oftentimes we're really quick to jump on a cause. Save the trees, whatever. There's a million causes, but oftentimes people don't know truly what the concern is. So when I got here from California, and I'm walking around the city trying to figure out what are the needs, what are the gaps, where's the hurting, like what's broken. Homelessness 17 years ago wasn't on the top of my radar. As I got to look at the lay of Denver, we had more resource providers than almost any city per capita. We have more bed space than needed if you truly want to get off the street. So like that didn't grip me. What started to grip me was meeting guys in transitioning from prison that didn't have a place to get a job or next step housing. It was, again, being in one of our neighborhoods, Westridge housing projects off of Colfax and Federal, and I always have my basketball shoes in my car, and so I found an outdoor basketball court, and I'm playing ball with some junior high and high school kids, and found out the next day one of those kids was shot and killed in a gang retaliation, 15 years old. And so that was like a grip to me of like, man, we have to do something. So I'm knocking on doors, getting no Denver housing, and just so all of that in the formative years brought us to a place of identifying the concerns. And then my passion shifted after meeting with our mayor, our police chief, trying to get with anybody in a position of leadership in our city, and honestly, just wanting to serve. I'm still like, all right, I'm going to be your Nehemiah. Like, what do you need? And I would find sometimes, now it's different, but in the early days, I would call everywhere I could and try to get on people's books and on the calendars, from the governor to the mayor to anybody in a position of leadership. And if they don't know who you are, oftentimes you can get a scheduled appointment, but then like the day before you'll get the like, sorry, something's come up and they can't meet with you now. And so there were so many rejections and denied moments. But once I would get the open door, it would be like this 30-minute meeting. And so I would come in and simply want to ask, like, what do you need? What are you working on? How can I help? And oftentimes they look at me, well, what do you need? I'm like, I don't need anything. I just want to help. Like, tell me what I can do. But I would also ask, like, what are the faith communities that you're tapping into when our city's in crisis? And oftentimes our police chief or mayor would tell me we really don't, because the faith community will overpromise and underdeliver, or they're just not connected to what our concerns are. So that then began to move me like, all right, I've got to create impact. And that will gain me influence. So my goal then was, all right, I've got to mobilize volunteers. I got to get the church and the faith community in a place where we are undeniably a part of the solution, and the city to recognize that. And if our impact is big enough and strong enough, then it creates the influence. Because I think everybody wants to try to influence, politics and decision making and all of that. But if you don't have a proof of concept that they're looking at, then you don't get to that place of influence. And so it just took years of getting to there. And then this thing right here sort of became, it was like the lifeline. And so probably good habit or bad habit, but anybody I would meet, I would simply say, hey, they call me Pastor B. Here's my cell number. If you need something, call me. And that started in the facilities, that started on the streets. And before I knew it, like my phone number was literally hanging in like the parole office or in case managers' offices. And my phone would just ring like 24/7, and I'm trying to answer and figure out where to go and what to do. And so we just saw things begin to grow. And so as we identified the needs that needed to be met, we started slowly building our team and our staff. But in the early days, I wanted to make sure a majority of the dollars that came in went right back to help, because we needed to make an impact in our city. And so, long story, but really 2020, when we met through the food, for me, that was like the breakthrough moment. There were plenty of years where, again, my pride was getting hurt, knowing I'm watching, from the ministry side, I'm watching friends of mine that I went to Bible college with, and their churches are growing. I see the influence they have, and I see, success, but we would say that people would have. And I'm like, I worked part-time jobs for 10 years. I left a big church where I was the comfortable pastor guy. And so when I'm here, I told my wife, like, give me 2 years, we'll be right on track and things will be great. Well, 2 years took 10 years. Yep. And just those crazy stories where, I tell people, one time I was driving to a meeting. We've been here about 2 years, and first time driving in snow in a long time. And I'm trying to hang my phone up, and I'm looking down. When I look up, a big truck had stopped. And so I plowed 45 miles an hour to the back of the truck, totaled my wife's car. I'm a mess, like, the windshield's shattered, and I've got broken fingers, and my face, I'm a mess. But I didn't have health insurance yet. And so when the EMT gets there, they're trying to put me in the ambulance. All I can think of is how expensive the ambulance ride is. And so they're like, sir, I'm like, just
give me some tape.
Do what you got to do. But like, I'm not getting in your ambulance. I'm thinking about the ambulance ride. I'm thinking about the ER visit. Yeah. And I'm like, they're like trying to force me in there. I'm like, I'm not, like, so they do what they have to do. And then I got to find and hitch a ride back to my house. And my wife's like, are you okay? And so then the next day, like, I'm looking, I've got glass in my hands and face. I don't know what to do. And I'd met a dentist. And so that was the best thing I could do, is call him and ask him if he could like Novocaine me up and get the glass out. And so he did. He thought it was actually sort of fun. And so we just had to run, like, again, crazy stories. But when 2020 hit, it's like everything made sense. Yeah. The 14 years to get there, all of a sudden when everything shut down in March, like everybody else, we waited a couple weeks to figure out, like, no one knew what the shutdown meant, right?
Yeah.
And so Easter weekend, April 10th or 11th, 3 weeks into the shutdown, again, now, because of building bridges and relationships, the emergency operations department is calling me to let me know what's going on. I'm talking with our mayor, our police chief, our public safety director. So now we say we have this, what's really powerful is a permission slip for partnership, right? This has nothing to do with like, hey, what's your belief in Jesus?
Right.
People are scared. Food is becoming an issue, job security, like critical crisis. So we're not going to split hairs on theology right now. We got to help people. Mm-hmm. And so with the city calling, we worked with our emergency operations department. And so Easter weekend, we built what we call hope boxes. We built 1,200 of them with food, resources. At that point, there's a lot of toilet paper and water. And we went knocking on doors in some of the high crisis neighborhoods. And we would drop a box off, step back. And this is before there were like cool masks. So we're like bandanas covering our faces. And of course, half of our guys look like we're robbing the neighborhood.
Right, yeah.
So we're in there, but people would come to the door and they would look at us and they would just start crying because they'd felt isolated, right? Fear had gripped in hard. And so that just paved the way to where now we're looking for practical ways that we can serve. And, local restaurants are struggling because they're shut down. And so we would raise money and then we would employ a restaurant for a day or 2 days to just make food, pay their employees. Then we'd take the food they would make and we'd go give it away. So we're trying to like keep businesses open. We're trying to provide needs. We're working with first responders, all of that mess. And then, May 25th, George Floyd happens. Mm-hmm. And now we watch our city go from pandemic crisis into the protest crisis.
That's right.
And on top of that, for March, April, May, for 3 months, really our city looked like a ghost town because businesses were closed. There's no Rockies games. There's no restaurants. There's no happenings down there. So our homeless community went from like little pocketed places to now literally homeless cities. And when the protests happened, now you've got marches, you got homeless, encampments everywhere, and it's just a recipe for disaster. And in the midst of that, it started with a phone call from Borden Farms out of Texas. They called the city. The city's obviously got a lot going on.
Right.
But out of relationship, they call me and they're like, can you help us get milk out to our city? And so we immediately say yes, not knowing details, but if there's an ask, we want to respond.
Yeah, your yes is on the
and we're
table.
ready. So we say yes, then I find out that it's 4,000 gallons of milk every Friday. It's a lot of milk, Jeff.
I do remember remember the milk.
So now we're trying to think like, man, how do we do that? Because they even asked, like, do you have the ability to transport it, refrigerate it? I'm just saying yes to everything, knowing in my head, like, I don't have any of these resources. But all right, God, we got to come through. And so a few phone calls later, thankfully, Kroenke Sports, we get a hold of them. The Nuggets are in Orlando. The Avs are playing in Canada. Everybody's in their bubbles. And so I'm like, I need your refrigeration system in the Pepsi Center so that we get milk out to our city. And they say yes. So here we are now. We're delivering milk out of like the Pepsi Center became our ground zero, which then opened the CARES Act a few weeks later. So every Friday, we would get 200,000 pounds of food.
That's right.
And our team, man, they just stepped up. We'd get there at 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun was up. Semi-trucks are rolling in. We have to unload everything. Now Kroenke's giving us the parking lot. So we move out there and just start what we call our Food Fridays. And only God, right? Like now we're seeing, we started with a couple hundred cars the first Friday. We work out a couple of kinks every Friday. We had anywhere from 500 to 1,000 cars come through. And so we turned it into our Friday morning church. We had areas where, we got the signs like people do now, like you can pull over here for prayer. Cars are coming through. I'm walking the lines. That's my favorite spot of just praying for people. But we have some of those powerful pictures that when our city was literally on fire and the protests are at the peak, on a Friday morning, what people wouldn't see is our mayor would come over, our police chief would be there, but we got former gang members volunteering, and I've got some beautiful pictures of people like that would step out of their car, and I know we're supposed to like socially isolate, but you've got a police officer in uniform with a gang member, different colors, praying for the same person and seeing our community come together. So what started in June of 2020 went for a full year. So we ended up doing 3.8 million pounds of food, and we fed like 700,000 people in the course of a year. So that started to explode the like, all right, what can we sustain? And now we can take on more opportunities, looking for ways that the city now can utilize really the strength of the faith community.
Man, even the Food Friday thing is, that was that's this is fruit from that right now, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
That is an amazing story. What's really going through my mind is preparation season is never wasted season.
Right.
Man, your 20s, your 30s, you're getting into your 40s. May of 2020 hits.
Right.
And it's like, who can I send? And you're like, here I am, Lord.
Right.
I'm right here.
Yep.
Right. And it's all comes to a climax right there.
Absolutely.
And the doors start opening. Man, you try to kick those. Like what I love about not trying to kick doors open, but walking in and saying, hey, listen, how can I help? I don't have an agenda. My agenda is to serve, right?
Absolutely.
And then that softens hearts, because I've been in a meeting with you, and I recognize it's a private meeting, so I won't disclose too many things, but we're in a meeting with pastors and business leaders and the very tippity top. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, we need help.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
We have a crisis going on, and we need to help these people.
Right.
And I'm sitting there in this meeting, and I'm going, this is if you want access to the city, it's right here.
Absolutely.
And it's not what everybody thinks it is. It's not a 3-piece suit at a podium, spewing what your agenda.
Right.
It's not, lobbing in a check, even though checks are great. I'm not taking,
definitely send checks.
But it's recognizing that there is an open door. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people just don't want to really look at where that door is. That there's an entrance into these metropolitan areas, because the truth is they need Jesus.
Absolutely.
They need hope.
Yep.
And you're a hope dealer is what you are, right? And at the end of the day, the Dream Center gives an amazing, it's ground zero now, if you want to call it that. So How did you guys get your facility? I love your facility.
Yeah.
Now it's home based. I know what I went down there on a Saturday. I was bringing my son down. And that's home base where you go out and serve the community. And they got like one of the streets shut down. And I'm like, why are all these streets shut down? Right. And I'm like, had to get there from like a roundabout way, And I'm like, well, it's downtown. You never know. And then we get there and you're like, well, yeah, they had to shut down a prostitution ring this morning. So,
yeah.
And I'm like, dude, like that's just not where I'm from, man.
Downtown has just gotten interesting. And, we tried to work really hard for a long time to not feel the weight and the burden of a building. And I even tell people, like, when my boys were super little and I'm chasing this radical dream of the Denver Dream Center, right? Like, I'm a visionary, so I'm seeing what can be long before. Again, I didn't think it would take 17 years to really see it where it is now. But my boys, when they were little, and we would drive into the city, as soon as they start seeing the buildings, I could, their little voice in the back seat, like, Dad, there's the Denver Dream Center. And that moment was, so true, because we didn't want to just pick a building to where that's the Dream Center. The Dream Center for us is the city and the people that we get to serve. So we took the long road to wait for the right opportunity. And we were in some different office places, and humbling and not humiliating, but humbling. Like, our first office space, we thought we just had won the lottery. A good friend stepped up and he was going to give $1,000 a month. He's like, I want you to get some office space. So we found this space near 46 and Pecos, right by Quig Newton housing projects, largest housing projects in Colorado. And it was a little strip mall. And if you walked in, it was an alteration shop. And in the back, I think illegally built, were these like metal stairs that went up, and someone built like a little studio apartment basically. And so I don't know why, but we rented that for our office space. And I've got a picture hanging in our office where the guy that owned it was a Chinese man that didn't barely speak English. So he and I are trying to like sign this lease agreement. I have no idea what he's saying. People behind are like laughing. I'm like, I don't know. He printed something off the internet. I don't think it's legal. And I don't even think that what he built there. So we had, for 2 years, that was our office space. So if you came down to see me like 2017, you would pull up and you're like, dude, where am I going? Like, and literally, we would have former gang members and inmates like coming to meet me. They would walk in and they're looking around, they'd walk out. They're like, this is like a drug deal gone bad. Because you walk in and Maria, God bless her, precious lady, she would greet you with hola and speaking Spanish. And you would ask the Dream Center, and then you see these back metal stairs that you're walking up like, I'm going to get jump shot. Like, no one's going to see me again. That was our office space for 2 years. So we moved from that into, it was a senior center. Great building. And so we had about 3,000 square feet that we turned into offices, and we had a garage that was our dream closet, and again, just like baby steps. But even that, people would like come to meet, and for credibility, they'd be like, "Yo, B, I'm here, but it says Senior Center." I'm like, "Yeah, that's us. just come upstairs." And so we were there for 2 years. So like just slow growth, but in 2021, we had an opportunity to go look at a building on Curtis Street. And again, I'm not a construction guy, so if something's broke in my house, it stays broke for like years until I finally pay someone to fix it. And so I'm looking at like the first building that they're showing me, and it's just a mess. Gorgeous outside, but it's like 16,000 square feet. The inside is a complete mess, and not enough parking. And so I'm not that inspired. Price was decent, but like the work was going to be miserable.
Yeah, Curtis though, downtown, it's got to be expensive.
It is incredibly expensive. Yeah. But we walk out and there's a little brick house building, and then a third building that's huge with this like barreled rooftop, classic construction. And I've driven by it a million times. And I find out he owns that building as well. And he had just put it up for lease. I'm like, what about that building? Like, I've always thought there should be a basketball court in there with that barreled rooftop. And he's like, well, funny you should say that. So we walk down, and when he opens those doors, it's like, it's already finished, right? There's a basketball court, climbing wall. Like, the building's beautiful. Somebody had bought it years ago, and dude had so much money, he made it like his personal man cave. And so just, hidden treasure on the inside.
That's right.
And so we didn't have the money, nowhere close to what he was needing. But again, my faith is like, well, we'll take this building, but also I want the other building as well. And so we work out an agreement. I'm like, give me 90 days so that we can get to at least where we could say yes and no. And we're like that newly married couple. I mean, we're 2 years into it, but we're still like month to month. But now we have 3 buildings, 2 parking lots, almost an entire city block.
So good, man.
And what we tell people, it's the wild, wild west in downtown right now. But we're literally in the epicenter of everything going on. And so, out our door to 21st and Curtis right now is the biggest homeless camp in the city. And then you walk down 22nd Lawrence, and it's the highest drug spot in our city. We have shootings and stabbings and overdoses like weekly. But now with this building and facility, every Tuesday night, we bring anywhere from 40 to 60 men from corrections and do a men's night, and guys' lives are being changed. Wednesday nights are youth night. So we send out vans and bring in 60 to 80 at-risk kids from the inner city to our building. Thursday nights, we do a community dinner. So we open up our building and we cater meals and feed 150 homeless people every Thursday. So there's always something going on.
Yeah, no doubt. And if you're listening to this thinking, I'm not sure they're doing all that, they're doing all that. Like they're doing it, and they're doing it. Like the scripture that comes to my mind is that you're a city on a hill that cannot be hidden.
That's it,
right? Like who lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, right? You're in the middle of it with God's anointing and His favor, and it's really powerful. We're going to put some links and different things on there when we share this podcast. So I want you guys to be able to connect with Denver Dream Center. Listen, if it's $5 a month, if it's $10 a month, sow some seed. He didn't come here for any type of publicity. I asked him to be here because he's a blessing. But I'm asking you to recognize that there's something happening in your city, or even if you're not in Denver, there's something happening here that there is being ground that's being taken for the kingdom of heaven. There are hearts being and souls being saved right in the midst of the chaos. And I recognize that not everybody listening to this podcast is living in an urban city like that, but listen, this is happening, and God is using Pastor B. He's doing amazing things. I would encourage you to at an absolute minimum, pray for him.
Yeah.
But sow some seed, $5, $10, $100. Throw some money at it, and attach your faith to it. And there's going to be an eternal weight to that. It's really, really good. And so I'll plug it for you because it's worth it. So you guys, you've been so gracious to come down today because this is really, 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 really busy season for you.
Yep.
I'm like, hey man, come do the podcast, drive all the way across town. But you said yes, and so we're gonna give you a gift today. It's a blessing to us to be able to do that. But I would love for you just to tell about the Denver Dream Center, what's happening in the next couple of months. People can probably still jump in and volunteer. If you want to see what's going on in your city in a controlled environment, man, bring your kids down there, let them see something different than what they're used to. It is better to give than receive, and it is such a blessing to watch these people light up when they get presents and stuff like that. So can you maybe give me some tangible things that you guys got going in the next month, how people can get involved and how we can get a hold of you at Denver Dream Center?
We've worked incredibly hard. So thank you for getting the opportunity to share this. We want to be the greatest volunteer conduit into our city. We know that people have good hearts, passions. Oftentimes, you just don't know how or where or what.
That's right.
So if you can't make it, number one, pray. We don't say that just to be spiritual, but it is so true. That spiritual battle, man, taking place right now is so deep. Just case in point. I mean, people that are addicted to fentanyl right now, it's just brutal, right? We know so many lives are being lost, and all around our building, we've got people that if they're not smoking every 3 hours or so, they're coming down, and it's so tough. But it's the spiritual battle. So we need prayer like crazy, financial support like crazy, but we love volunteers because we know once you come, I tell people you got to be careful because it's spiritually addictive.
Absolutely,
because there are so many family friendly things. Our adopt-a blocks, we go into the communities and we're just playing with kids. Our youth nights, our community dinners, like they're safe, controlled opportunities to be part of that, but the holidays are right now. So, I tell people I feel a little bit like Santa Claus, where I know how tired he must get by the time Christmas Day is done. But again, it's being a dad, right? The father's heart, like greatest thing on Christmas morning to seeing your kids smile and just having family together. So we started years ago just building opportunities to be a blessing during the holidays. And so we did our food drive and give and go long last Saturday, and that sort of launches us into the holiday season. So we have multiple events coming up, but the biggest ones, it's all on our website, denverdreamcenter.org, but December 15th and 16th, we have just over 600 families that have signed up through Denver Housing, And so you can adopt a family or multiple families. Most people like to adopt and then meet them at the Dream Center. And we, our guys, actually it's pretty funny. We started decorating yesterday. So we've got like 12 or 13 former gang members and inmates like hanging Christmas lights and decorating. So it's fun watching them. So we're turning the whole Dream Center into like a Christmas wonderland and party. But 15th and 16th, people get to meet those families in person and decorate Christmas cookies and drink eggnog and just have fun with them and get them the toys. That's Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday, December 17th in the afternoon, we actually take over Coors Field because it's gotten so big. So we'll have anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 people come through. And we'll have toys, coats, food, and the family gets to come through. We have an area where we pull the kids off to the side so that the moms or the parents can actually pick out the toys, wrap them there, and get blessed before they go.
Awesome.
And then on Tuesday, December 19th, we have, we call it Christmas to Remember. It's one of my favorite events. We pull in guys from the correctional facilities and bring their families and kids together. So there's a lot of dads that literally haven't seen their kids in 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, and this is the first time they get to see them. So it's not in a facility, it's not under supervision of a case manager or security, but at the Denver Dream Center, and they get to eat a meal. We have 110 kids already signed up, about 100 dads coming. And
That's
it's just
so good, man.
It's an amazing party. All up to our last event, actually, is December 29th. We take over Ball Arena and do a basketball clinic on the court, so we get kids an experience to be on the court and taken to the game during the holidays.
I love it, man. That's so powerful what you're doing. I love it. I especially love the letting the parents wrap the presents.
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
not looking to steal their dignity. You're like,
No.
listen, let us just help you deliver and be a mom and a dad, right?
Yeah.
That's so strong.
Yeah,
So
our job
good.
is to get out of the way and,
right.
and strengthen families.
How with those 600 families that are signed up, how many of those are spoken for?
As of yesterday, I think we were about 200 have been adopted. I tell people, whoever put Thanksgiving and Christmas like 4
Next
weeks
to each
apart,
other, yeah.
Oh my gosh, if Thanksgiving was like in September or
Right.
maybe March, but most of the times people got to get through this week of Thanksgiving and then they flip their Christmas hat on.
Okay.
So it's slow right now. Then next Monday the 27th is the hard push.
Okay.
But it's fun because like we always try to pick a family that's got 3 boys so that my boys can pick out toys and have that same sort of experience.
Yep.
And but yeah, the links are all live. Families are all on there. You can sometimes businesses will say we want 10 families, and then you bring your coworkers down together, or you do it as a small group where you come down and spend an hour giving out toys and meeting the families.
Yeah, man, that's so good. So here's the deal. If you're watching this podcast, you probably have some sort of connection to this podcast and what we're trying to do. And so I hope we laid enough groundwork to understand that Pastor B, like Denver Dream Center, I recognize with a lot of nonprofits, it's like, I don't know how much is actually go. Let me tell you that this is vetted. This is the real deal. We've had you and I have had a relationship, but you've had a relationship with people I've had a relationship for a long time, right? So this is good ground to sow into, and it's got a significant kingdom impact. Support a family. Let's do it, man. Jump in there and do it. It's fun to start. Like God's not looking for you to conquer, the giant at this moment. But sometimes it's just like, hey man, I can just go down there and pick up 5 stones. I can do that part of it, right? So my encouragement would be to get into it. This is gonna be a fun season, holiday season. Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
really
for
good.
the opportunity to share, and excited to see what God's gonna do.
I love it, man. I love it. Listen, God is calling you deeper with your call and your purpose. I said it earlier that the enemy is looking to steal your purpose, and a lot of times when we're engaging in our day-to-day, God is preparing you through the preparation season. I love the testimony of like, look, I was just going out looking for souls. I was looking for people. I just wanted to serve. God uses the moments of your life and the story of your life. There is a specific calling and a purpose and anointing that you have, that God's given you, that fits directly into where he's calling you to go, but is going to require faith. And he's going to show up in a significant way, and it's amazing. Thank you for tuning in to the Built for a Purpose podcast. Our guest, Pastor B, and I'm your host, Jeff Vanderwall. Thank you guys for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.